Okay, so we're going to go into the second part. This is going to be verse 27 to the end of chapter 1, and then all through chapter 2. Once again, if you have any snacks that you're still eating, go right ahead. Don't feel ulaw or anything like that, because I think we still have a few more out there. If you need somewhere to drink, let them know. So we'll get you something. Okay. Okay. So we just got done talking about, it's a win-win situation. Whether he lives or dies, fine. So long as Christ is preached. This was his motivation behind this. So it didn't matter if he died. It didn't matter if he got out or not. Whatever happens, Christ is glorified. God is glorified. Right? Okay. In verse 27 to 30, this is 27 to the end of the chapter. Whatever happens, whether he lives, whether he dies, whatever happens, he encourages them to do something. Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come to see you, like he has planned, that he wants to go and see them, whether I come and see you or not, or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man in the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them, those that oppose you, right? This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God, being saved by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggles you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. They saw these things that he had struggled with, right? And they heard that he was in prison. That's why there's a concern. That's one reason why he's writing to them, to explain these things to them, so they don't have to worry about him anymore. Okay. So he says here, whatever happens, whether he lives or whether he dies, he wants them to do something. He wants them to remain unified, because apparently there's been a problem in this place. And at the end of the book, we will see that, like I said before, he had mentioned two people specifically who are arguing or are having problems. They're not unified, right? They're having difficulties, and these probably not just the only ones. There are probably some others as well. Because when two people start to argue, usahay mo himo na siya mga kampo bitaw. Some people will side with this one, some people will side with this one. Mga factions, diba? Usahay, diba? So possibly this is the start of something like that. He wants to stop this. And so he mentions these things. And at the end of the book, he also talks about them directly, specifically. You too, stop and be reconciled with one another. No? So, he wants them to remain unified. Because if there is division, then, the kingdom doesn't benefit. But if there is unity, then, God is glorified. Even if he doesn't see them, he wants to see them. God is his witness, he wants to see them. Remember, he talked about that in chapter 1. God is his witness. He wants to go and be with them. But, whether he comes to see them or not, continue. That's it. Stand firm in your faith. Continue in that faith. Be strong in that faith and don't give up. They have no reason to be afraid of the people, the ones that persecute them. They have no reason to be afraid. No need to be ashamed of the gospel. No? It's another thing that he mentions to them. Because this, if they are unified, then they have no reason to be afraid. If they are divided, however, If a kingdom is not united, it falls apart. Diba? It falls apart from the inside out. A lot of times. A kingdom that is united will not fall. So the idea here is, they don't have to be afraid if they are united. It says, because this will be a sign to them, those that oppose you. Where it says those that oppose you, this will be a sign to them that they will be destroyed. And that you will be saved. He says that they will be granted two things. It says, verse 29, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ. Christ grants these things. To believe in Him and to suffer for Him. The idea here is one of privilege. No? It's a privilege to suffer. Interesting thought. No? To suffer for Christ is a privilege. Ever thought about it that way? At least that's his attitude. No? If you're suffering, it means you're doing something right. The human way of thinking is, if you're suffering, you're doing something wrong. But no. It says, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in Him, but also to suffer for Him. No? It says, since you are going through the same struggles you saw I had. They're going through the same things that he had in the past. Persecution is there. They're being hunted. It started with him. No? And it didn't end with him. It continued back. But these struggles that he's going through, he's in prison. Some of them have been in prison before. No? Some of them, when you go against people who are teaching things that are wrong, I'm talking about the Jews here in this case. They talked against the Jews. They talked against the different religions that they had in that time. People won't like it. If you're different in society, people look down on you. They try to get you to conform. You don't be different. You be the same. Because that's how people work. He's trying to get them to understand that, these things, if you suffer for Christ, that's a good thing. If you suffer for doing good, that's a good thing. Okay, in chapter 2, he encourages the Christians to be united. In chapter 2, verse 1 to 4. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from His love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Interesting. Once again, they're having difficulties with unity. They're having problems. And he is encouraging them to be unified with one another. Unity is one of the things that he talks about very many times in this book. He says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, well, it's assumed they did. The way it's asked, it's assumed they did. No? Which they did. If you have any comfort from His love, which they did. If you have any partnership with the Spirit, they were Christians, they did. Right? If you also have any affection or compassion, they did. Then do what? make his joy complete by doing what? By being like-minded. If a group of people is like-minded, or in other words, they have the same way of thinking, will they be unified? No. It's all up in here. If you're thinking about yourself, there is no unity. But if you're thinking about the cause or the goal, no, then unity is possible because you put your own desires, your own thoughts aside, and conform to do whatever is necessary to reach that goal. And this is something that he is trying to get them to do because they are not unified right now as it stands. And this is something that he's working to get them to do. So, and in doing this, his joy, he has joy right now, despite his suffering, despite his situation. He has joy because Christ is being preached, whether for for wrong motivations or good motivations, it doesn't matter to him. Christ is being preached, and this is why he has joy. But he wants his joy to be complete, and the only way for that to happen is for them to be like-minded, for them to be unified. Okay, and that's the idea there. He says, don't do anything out of selfishness. Right? Like I said, if you think about yourself, if your group of people are working together and you think about yourself over the rest of the group won't work. It won't attain the goal that it's trying to accomplish. There's no I in the word team. Right? That's the idea here. As a team, you have to work together. The only way you work together is if you all have the same way of thinking. Diba? That's when a team works at its best. So, his goal in this is to try to get them to understand that, focusing on the goal, not your own desires, not your own ambitions or anything like that, but the goal. This is the only way to attain unity. No? He also talks about putting others before yourself, putting the needs of others before yourself. Obviously, this is something that they're not doing. It's interesting when you read something in these letters, and he mentions that they need to be doing something or doing this or doing that. It's assumed that they're not, because why would they mention something if they're not actually doing it? Diba? If say for example, I was doing something wrong and somebody wrote a letter to me, they wouldn't talk about the things that I'm doing right. They would talk about the things I'm doing wrong. If the goal of the letter is to get me to fix the wrong things, they wouldn't talk about the things I'm doing right. They would talk about the things I'm doing wrong. Diba? These letters are written to groups of people who are having problems. And he addresses these problems. Unity is one. Putting others before themselves. This is something they weren't doing. No? Yes, they were a good, faithful bunch, but these problems were there as well. And this is not the only place where we see this is not the only group of people that we see were having these problems. Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, all these other letters that he wrote, all had something in there. Some talked about false teachers. Others talked about, how certain people were committing adultery or things like this. But others, it seemed small things. Like they weren't unified. They weren't putting others before themselves. And this is something that is important. He uses an example. The following section has an example for us to follow. And that example is Christ. He uses Christ. Okay? This is probably one of the most important sections in the book that we have, that we can find, because this talks about Christ and His coming to this earth. No. Who was Christ? We know Christ was God, right? John chapter 1, verse 1 to 3 and verse 14. 1 to 3 says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and everything that was made through Him. And we find, we continue reading, and it continues to talk about this Word, and in verse 14 it talks about how this Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Christ was that Word, right? He was God, He was in the beginning, and everything that was made through Him. He was the one who created the world. So, this man, Jesus, he was, I guess we'll read it first, then we'll go through it. It says in verse 5, following, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, something to hold on to, right? But made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even a cross death. Therefore, or because of this, God exalted him to the highest place, and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. This is our example. The attitude that he just mentioned about putting others first. This is the best example we have. This is the perfect example of putting others first. Christ was equal with God, right? He was with God, He was God, and everything that was made through Him. So here we have a scale kind of thing. We have Jesus and we have God, okay? Now Jesus and God are equal, but He didn't consider that equality as something to hold on to, something to keep. So what did He do? He emptied Himself of everything that made Him different from us. He took that equality, and everything that made Him equal with God, He got rid of. And now He is equal with man. And in the likeness of man, He came, He lived on this earth, and He became like us and was obedient. During His life, everything that He did for God, right? Everything that He said because God wanted Him to say it. All the things that He did, the way He lived His life is the way that He wants all of us to live our lives. This was the example that He gave. And because of these things, because He was obedient even to death, the Garden of Gethsemane, He asked, let this cup pass from me. Is there another way? He didn't want to die, but his final say was, let not my will, but your will be done. Now, the fact that he mentions a cross death is also significant. In the Roman Empire, a cross death was reserved for murderers. The pinaka-heinous na crimes. The worst crimes you could commit. Did Christ ever kill anyone? Did Christ ever steal or anything like that? What was Christ's big crime? Being different. And the cross death was reserved for them. It was a shameful death. Because you're hung on that cross for several days until you die. And everybody who sees you, it's up on a hillside that everybody can see. Everybody in the city can look up and, there's that guy. His big crime was that he was different. And and he endured a shameful death. A death that was reserved only for murderers. Rapists, murderers, these kinds of people. And because of him doing this, what happened? Because of his obedience and his willingness to give up everything that made him equal with God, all of these things, because of all of these things, because of all these things, God graced to him. It says graced to him. The word there is the Greek word for grace. The idea of the word is like this. It is a gift. It's like when you have a birthday party, and someone comes and brings you a present, a gift. Do you deserve that gift? Do you deserve that gift? A person comes and they bring a gift. Do you deserve it? No, you don't. Out of the kindness of their heart, they decide to buy you a gift. It's your birthday, so they decide to give you a gift. You don't deserve it, but they give it to you anyway. The word that is used here is to relay that idea. Jesus didn't deserve this. God graced to him a name that is above all names. Because of his obedience, his complete obedience. See, why does Jesus not deserve this? Because he only did what God wanted him to do. Not more, not less, but what God expects from all of us. And because he did this, 100%, God graced to him this gift, this name that is above all names. And at that name, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. In heaven, and on earth, and under the earth. The idea is there, angels, some of the scholars will say, that statement, heaven, earth, under the earth, is talking about angels, men, demons, these kinds of things. Because you can, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Christ is Lord. Because of his obedience to God. Kind of interesting to think about. But the word that is used there is, to relay the idea of it was a gift given to him that he did not deserve. So, every knee shall bow in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. Every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And to the glory of God the Father. When a person, when any of these things, when someone says that Jesus Christ is Lord, who gets the glory? Why does God get the glory? Why does God get the glory and not Christ? Because God put him there. God put him there, and therefore when we glorify Christ, we glorify God. We glorify the one that put him there. The highest place. Diba? That's the idea. Because of the things that Jesus did, because he lived a life just like God wants us to live our lives, he was rewarded. He was given a gift. And that gift was his name was above every name. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And when they do that, God gets the glory. God the Father gets the glory. Because he was the one who put him in that place. Okay. Chapter 2, verse 12 to 18. So, he just got done talking about, unity. and putting others first. And he gives the example of Christ and how Christ put us before his own desires. I mean, he could have kept. I mean, he was equal with God. I mean, why would you give something like that up? We humans, we think about it that way, you know. If I had that much power, I wouldn't give it up. I wouldn't give it up for the world. But Christ did. He gave it up for the world. Diba? He put all those things aside, became like us in every single way, lived his life just like God wanted to live, died a humiliating death, and because of that, God graced him this name above every name. He was obedient, and he's encouraging them to have the same obedience in this next section. So he says, therefore, my dear friends, because of this, because of the things Christ did, because of the obedience that he has, that he was rewarded all of these things, because of this, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. Do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure children of God, without fault in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe, as you hold out the word of life, in order that I may boast on the day of Christ, that I did not run or labor for nothing. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. Once again, he refers back to his possibly dying idea, being sacrificed kind of thing. Okay. Let's see what we got. He says that the Philippians, were always obedient to God, whether Paul was there or not. And he wanted that to continue. They were obedient to God. Yes, they have problems. But for the most part, they were faithful to God. He wants them to get rid of those problems. He wants them to be unified. But he also wants them to continue obeying God, doing the will of the Father. Remember what we talked about in Matthew 7, 21 to 23 yesterday. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom. These people were doing the will of the Father. And he wanted them to continue. Right? Let's see. They were told to work out their salvation with fear and trembling. Each and every one of us are responsible for our own salvation. No? They were too. They were responsible for their salvation. It was their responsibility to do the things that God wanted, to obey. He tells them to do everything. Do everything without complaining. Don't complain. You complain, you cause problems. Was Paul complaining about his situation? I mean, he's in jail. He could have started complaining. Oh, I can't believe I'm in jail again. God, this is just, this is too much. It's so hot in here. Does he complain? No. Because what does complaining do? There's no benefit in complaining. Diba? So what does he tell them to do? Don't complain. But do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure children of God. They were to be blameless and innocent. Obviously, some people were complaining about stuff. Once again, why would he say it? Well, some were probably grumbling about certain things. I don't know. What things? It doesn't say what things, but it could be. There were people who were not unified. There were people who were complaining all the time about things. I don't like meeting here because it's too hot, or it's too far away, or I have to do all that. What use is that? What benefit will arguing and complaining have? Nothing. It will only cause division. So get rid of those things. Unity is the key. Christ didn't complain. I have to die on a cross? I mean, come on. Can I die some other less shameful way? He didn't complain. When they were beating him, he didn't complain. Why? Because he put others first. The needs of others. We needed him to die. Because without him dying, we wouldn't have a chance. Right? These people would not be in the situation that they're in right now if it wasn't for Christ. They wouldn't have the relationship that they have with one another if it wasn't for Christ. Paul wouldn't be, traveling around. He wouldn't be in prison if it wasn't for Christ. And he says that even if he has to die, he is happy. He rejoices. And he wants them to rejoice with him. Right? That they should be glad. Okay. In the last section of the fund, we have mentions of two different people. Timothy and Epaphroditus. Now, Timothy we talked about last time, and yesterday. He's a mestizo. He's half Jew, half Greek. His mother was a Christian. His grandmother was a Christian. And he spent a lot of time with Paul. Remember, this is near the end of Paul's life. Within like a five-year period or so, he's gonna die. He's gonna be killed. Right? So Timothy has been with him a lot. In fact, the section concerning Timothy is chapter 2, verse 19 to 24. So let's read 19 to 24, and then the last section is Epaphroditus. It says 19, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him, who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope therefore to send him as soon as I see how things are to go with me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. Okay. He says some good things about Timothy. In fact, commends Timothy for the way he is, the person that he is. Because most people, they don't think about, they just think about themselves. But Timothy, just like Paul, puts others first. Others' needs first before his own. He's been with Paul for many, many years by this time. There are times where, like I said, he separates from Paul. He stays in this one place to continue encouraging the brothers to do what they know is right. And then later on, meets up with Paul again, and they continue on their journeys, going from place to place to place, encouraging the brothers. And continuing everywhere they go to preach the gospel. So, he wanted to send Timothy to them. Right? He wants to send Timothy to go with them for a reason. His reason is so that he can get some news as to how these people are. Right? He wants to know how they are. He wants to be encouraged. So he sent Timothy to them so that he can see how they are and then come back and tell him. Or maybe even bring a letter from them to him or something like this. It's possible that if and when he did send Timothy, Timothy could have brought this particular letter with him when he goes to Philippi. And at the end of that section, in verse 24, he says that I want to send him, but I hope that I will also be able to come too. Once again, he really wants to go and visit these people. He obviously has a good relationship with them because, he's one of the first few congregations that he started. He'd gone from place to place to place. In his second missionary journey, he goes up to Philippi, starts converting people there. First time there, he converts Lydia and her household, the jailer and his household, possibly, not sure, it doesn't say, but possibly the young girl, the slave girl. But it's uncertain because it doesn't say. Some theologians say one way, some say the other. But the thing is, we know that congregation grew because of some of the things that we saw in chapter 1. It grew and grew and grew until, and he wants to know how they are because he thinks about them constantly. And every time he thinks about them, he thanks God for them and for their faith and for their continuing in the faith. He commends Timothy for the kind of person he is. That just like him, he puts others first. He doesn't say that, just like me, he does this. But you look at Paul's attitude and you look at Timothy's attitude, they're the same. Right? Timothy is since they've spent so much time together, they are like-minded. They're a team. They work together. They work good together. All for the glory of God. He also talks about his relationship with Timothy and their travels and things like this. But he wants to send Timothy to them to visit them so that he can be encouraged to know how they are and that they can also be encouraged as well. And hopefully he will follow if he gets out. Or he will go there one day. Okay. The last section for our time today is chapter 2, verse 25 to the end of the chapter. It's a man named Epaphroditus. It says, "But I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you, and is distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, and he almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me to spare his life. To spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. Welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor men like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help that you could not give me." This man Epaphroditus, I don't know how long he's been with Paul, but we know he's been with Paul for a while. Now, when he says fellow soldier, he's talking about the soldier of Christ being, contending to the faith, with the faith and things like this, combating against the evil one and all this kind of stuff. It's a phrase that he uses very often in his letters to describe the way a Christian is supposed to, the way a Christian lives is like a soldier who is always fighting, trying to keep away from sin, always trying to do what God wants as opposed to doing what they want. There's always a fight going on up in here. And he uses this metaphor to refer to them. So when he says fellow soldier, fellow Christian who is trying to live life the way God wants them to. Okay, so Epaphroditus. We know that Epaphroditus was actually from Philippi because he says that they sent him. The people in Philippi were the ones who sent one of their own to go administer to whatever Paul needed. Right? So just like, I want to say it's kind of like Timothy. When he was on the second missionary journey and he got to Timothy's hometown and they talked about how good Timothy was and they sent him with Paul and Paul brought him with him. It could be like that, or it could be that there was a specific need that Paul had that they wanted to help. They wanted to help support him in that way and help with the work. And so Epaphroditus was their representative to do these things, to help with whatever Paul was doing or needed or things like this. It was kind of like he was their missionary. They sent him. So he was from Philippi, and we know that he got very sick. It says that he became very sick. In fact, he's writing, one of the reasons why he is also writing this letter is to let them know that he is okay. He was sick. In fact, they heard he was ill. In fact, it was actually much worse than that. He was ill to the point of almost death. But Christ spared his life. And Paul is thankful for that. Because he doesn't have to, his anxiety is relieved in that he doesn't have to worry about his companion anymore from dying. Plus, he also doesn't have to worry about their concern for him anymore. So they have a concern. They're wondering how Epaphroditus is. But it seems as though Epaphroditus is also homesick. He wants to go home. He wants to go, see his family and see, whatever. I don't know what reason he has, but he is anxious to go home. And so, with all of these reasons, Paul decides to send Epaphroditus. And it's also possible, if he didn't actually send Timothy, he says he hopes to send Timothy, but if he didn't actually send Timothy, he did send Epaphroditus. And it is possible that Epaphroditus was the one who brought this letter to them. Because a lot of times when it says you accept this person and things like this, usually they're the ones who bring the letters. Remember, they don't have any mail service at the time. They didn't have the postal service. They didn't have email or texting or things like this. It all had to be hand delivered. So somebody had to bring it. Right? So it's possible Epaphroditus was the one. Now this is one way that the church in Philippi helped Paul in things that he did. They sent one of their own to help him. Right? So, he was a fellow worker. We know he worked with Paul in spreading the gospel. He was a fellow worker. He was, what did he say about him? Fellow soldier. He called him his brother. And their messenger, whom they sent to take care of his needs. It says, he longs for all of you, and distresses because you heard that he was ill. So, because of all these things, he decides to send Epaphroditus home and be with them. Pretty cool. So, his sickness almost killed him, but God was with him, and he got better. Right? He got better, but now he wants to go home. So because of this, and the concern that they had for him, and also his desire to go home, Paul wanted to send him home, and it's possible that he was the one who delivered the message, delivered the letter to Philippi. And that's chapter 2. Halfway there. So, what have we seen? Well, At the very beginning, Paul talks about them and his relationship with them, and that he is thankful for them every time. He thanks God for them every time that he thinks about them, right? And he's writing to them because they heard that he was in prison, and he wants to explain to them that not to worry about him because his situation is for the good of the gospel, for the good of the kingdom, right? Because of his situation, the message is being preached. Christ is being preached, and that's all he's concerned about. He doesn't care whether he's going to live or he's going to die. Either way, it's okay with him, right? But he has this confidence that he's going to get out. And when he does, he wants to go and visit them, right? So, his attitude was not for himself, but for others. He also talks to them about the unity idea in chapter 2, right? He wants them to have unity with one another, because apparently this is something that they are having problems with, right? Having the same mind, right? For them to have the same mind. If a group wants to work together, wants to be unified, they have to think the same way. They have to focus on a goal and do whatever it takes to achieve that goal. But if anybody in the group, decides, I'm going to do what I want to do, then, it's very difficult. And it could just destroy the whole thing, the whole team, right? So, having the same mind, being unified, these are things that he talks about. And he talks about putting others before yourself. Don't put yourself first. Put others before yourself. And he uses the example of Christ and how Christ, when he made himself, when he was equal with God, he didn't think that was something to hold on to. He emptied himself, became equal with us in every way, lived his life the way God wanted, obeyed whatever God said, and left us an example. And when he died a shameful death. He didn't complain about anything. And let's see. So his example was there. He talked about obedience and encouraged them to continue to be obedient. They were obedient already, but he wants them to continue, not to give up on them. Just like Christ. Right? He says to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. He wants them to be blameless. Do everything without complaining so that you're blameless and innocent. And he talks about his two companions, Timothy, who always puts others first. He commends Timothy for the kind of person he is, by putting others first, never really thinking about himself first. And then he talks about Epaphroditus, who they sent to him. And now he wants to go home because he heard that they have concerns for him because they heard he was ill. And so he writes to them to tell them that he's okay. Right? And that they don't have to worry, that he's alive. And it was serious at one point, but because of God, everything worked out. And now he's going home. And this is where we're going to stop for tonight. So tomorrow we're going to pick up on that. And we're going to read chapters 3 and 4. So everybody, as a homework assignment, please read through chapter 3 and 4. Write down main points that you can find. And tomorrow we'll go through that. Okay? And when we get to the end of chapter 4, what we're going to do is we're gonna just go through the book, like I just did with the first 2 chapters. We're going to go through the book and see what his overall goal was. Why did he write this letter to the Philippians? And then put everything into its proper context to see what it is, what was the purpose for the Philippian letter to these readers. We know kind of who they were. We don't have very much information about them, but we know that they were devout people to God. They were faithful. But they did have a few problems. We know who Paul was because of our first meeting yesterday. We know who Timothy was. He was just like Paul. He had the same kind of attitude that Paul had. They're both crazy people. They're crazy people. As far as the world is concerned, that's just ridiculous. Why would you put yourself in that situation over and over and over again? Because their mind was on a goal. That Christ should be preached. No matter what. Didn't matter if they, were put in prison, were beaten to death, it didn't matter. Whether he was going to live or die, to live is Christ, to die is gain, and that was his attitude. And that's awesome. Okay?
One question.
Yes.
Can you explain how come you say that Christ doesn't deserve it? Because in fact, in my opinion, Jesus Christ deserved to be exalted because of what he did. Everything he did is according to the will of the Father.
Yes.
Then how come you say he doesn't deserve it?
Because everything that he did was everything that he was asked to do, he did. It's like this. Let's say you have a servant, a slave, right? And the slave-master relationship, the slave is owned by the master. And you ask, your slave goes out to work in the fields or whatever that you have, and the slave comes in, he's had a long day where he's been working and things like this. Do you say to that slave, rest, relax, go and make yourself some food and things like this? No. The slave, the slave will administer to what you want first, and then take care of himself. Right? Now, if you've heard the stories of Jesus, I'm just using a story that Jesus told. The point is, does that slave deserve any kind of recognition or good treatment or anything like that? In the slave-master relationship, the slave is only doing what the master told him to do. So he doesn't deserve any kind of recognition. All he's doing is what the master says. Jesus only did what God wanted him to do. Jesus was a slave, just like you and I. He put himself in that position. And so everything that God wanted him to do, he did, without question, without grumbling. And because of this, because he was willing to do this, to risk everything, God graced to him. He didn't deserve it. All he did was what the slave was supposed to do. Because he was a slave, just like you and I. And that is why.
What makes him equal with God? He is a slave.
He gave that up. Remember, he put everything that made him equal with God. He gave that up. He put that aside. He emptied himself. It's like taking a Coke and pouring out the contents. The contents is what made him God. No? Everything that made him equal with God, he put that aside. Emptied himself. Became equal with us in every way. Just like a slave. It says in the form of a slave. Lived his life obedient to what God wanted. And because of this, he was graced this high position. It's difficult for us to understand because, like I said, we don't have the slave-master relationship anymore that used to be around. Slaves did not have any say. Slaves had to do what the master said regardless. No? And it's very difficult for us to wrap our heads around because, but that's the way it was done. Does the slave deserve any kind of recognition for the things that he does? No, because he is a slave. He is the property of the master. And what the master wants, the slave does. Diba? Jesus was a slave. He came, lived his life, died, a slave. But because he did it 100% the way God wanted, God gave him a gift. Something that he didn't deserve. And that gift was the name that was above all names. That word there, grace. That's what grace means. Something, a gift that is not deserved. Something that is given to you that you do not deserve. That's fine. Because he was a slave. He became a slave. Any other questions?
Dad, regarding since Christ was sent to the world to give us an example, and for that reason, God the Father was glorified.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even the Father is glorified. I think that's not the question is because we know that God the Father or God loves us, but the question is in our side, if we love also God, that's the question of how do we repay God.
How do we show our love for God?
Yeah, because no question about God, because God always loves us.
Well, we see that in the thing that Christ did. Yes.
Our part, how do we love God in return?
Mm-hmm. I heard many people say the same thing. From what we see in the scriptures, it's doing what he says. What is best for God? How do we show our love, agape, our love for God? By doing what he says. By obeying. Just like Paul did. Just like these people in Philippi did. Now, how does God know that we love him? By the things that we do. It is evident by the things that we do. Right? The way we live, the way we act, the way we treat other people. Are they the same as what Christ did? Remember, God wants us to do what Christ did. The way Christ lived, the way Christ treated people. That's the kind of way we're supposed to live. The teachings that Christ gave were all principles. Right? The situation with the trying to think. I'm blank right now. The story with the guy who the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. The story with the Good Samaritan. Okay? There are 4 people involved in that story. The one was a Jew who got beat up, right? Almost died. Then somebody walks by who is also a fellow Jew, who is a Levite, right? Then the third guy is a priest, right? And then the last guy is a Samaritan. Okay, the Levite, the priest. The priests are of the tribe of Levi. Okay? They are the ones from the family of Aaron who are supposed to administer to the temple and things like this. The Levites were supposed to do, they had special things that they were supposed to do as well. Of all the people in the Jewish nation, you would think that one of those guys would have done it. But no, it had to be an enemy. A Samaritan. A person that the Jews hate. Samaritans were mestizos. Half Jews, half something else. Right? And so they were bitter towards each other. They always fought. And yet, this Samaritan put those things aside and did what was right. the way we live is how we show God that we love Him, by doing what He says. It's not enough to be religious. Matthew 7:21-23. Remember, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom. The will of the Father. That's how. The will of the Father is key in that. How do we know what the will of the Father is? Study. Context. Put all of these things into its proper context. Don't just listen to what I'm saying. Don't take what I'm saying about this for granted. You go home, take the notes that I've gotten, look up the verses, look up the stuff. It's all there. Put it in context. You make your conclusions, because remember, they were told to work out their salvation with fear and trembling. They were responsible. You are too. I can't account on the day of judgment for you. I won't be there for you. I have to account for my own doings. And so that's the key. So study. Study, and that's fun. It's now 8 o'clock. Once again, we want to encourage everyone to take a look at the schedule. We have a session of classes starting, and it'll start this Monday. If you have not studied with us yet, talk to those who have. We've got a bunch of people here who have studied with us, and we talk about a bunch of interesting things just by putting things into its proper context.